Hi, welcome to the episode. I'm so excited to have Liz Taylor with me today. Liz, will you go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Liz Taylor. I'm an illustrator and a mom of a dyslexic son who is now 13. And I also have a neurotypical daughter who is just about to turn 16 in a couple of weeks. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we were just talking about how we found each other. I found Liz on Instagram with her awesome illustrations. And I don't even know how I stumbled on you, but I feel so lucky that I did. And then I love that you reached out. I think I ordered some of your materials, like samples, which I love. I'm excited to use them. And you happen to mention that you are involved with dyslexia advocacy, and you helped illustrate a book. So I'm so excited to have you on here. So maybe explain a little bit about your journey to understanding dyslexia.
sure, sure. So my son, Alex, is a 13-year-old, and when he was in preschool, even toddler age, we started to notice things that were just a little bit different about him, and not in a negative way at all. He just had this really sophisticated vocabulary, and he started talking really early, which we thought was really funny because we have an older daughter, and our pediatrician said, expect him to speak later because his sister's probably going to speak for him, and he has never let in his life. But we saw this really sophisticated ability to draw at a young age. So some of those things were really interesting. And then as he started in preschool, we noticed that while he had the vocabulary and the verbal ability, he wasn't connecting to just basic sounds on some of the preschool activities. He didn't understand that the letters represented sounds, and he was really sort of pushing work away, like that sort of schoolwork, he just didn't want to do it. And so we were hearing over and over from teachers that, well, he's a boy and he wants to play, and and it was sort of brushed off like that. And so when we were kind of approaching kindergarten, we just didn't feel like he was ready. And I think part of the thing that helped us was that we had the older child and we knew what kindergarten readiness looked like.
Wow.
And we weren't seeing those signs in him. And so we elected to do a private kindergarten so we could kind of buy a year and see where he was at. And then the next year we would either do public kindergarten or public first grade, depending on what happened. But he just really wasn't tracking that year. And so we elected to do another year of kindergarten. And, I would say about halfway through that year, I knew something was wrong. And I hate to say wrong, but, he wasn't,
Yeah.
Something was off. And so we, tried some different things that I was doing with him. And it just, I could see like he would figure out a word on one page, and then that word would show up on the next page and it was gone. And I thought, okay, something's not connecting there. And so then kind of entering into first grade that year, we were prepared to try to figure out, like, I think he needs an IEP and we need to start to go through that process. And we ended up in the end doing a private psych evaluation. We did a full psych evaluation and we got the diagnosis of dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and ADHD, and very profound. So it was sort of shocking. And then it was like, okay, at least it has a name, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I was so relieved to get the diagnosis, but I had no idea how difficult it was going to be moving forward, because I just thought, oh, okay, well, this is what's going on, so there are things for that, and we're just going to do it. But it's a very long road. So we ended up pulling him out of first grade for the second semester and started some cognitive therapy, and then we moved him into remediation tutoring for dyslexia, and he's still in that program. So now in seventh grade, he's in the last two levels.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier, how you were saying the road was so difficult. I have a special ed background in teaching. And so we always, whenever we had kids come to us and the parents said, oh, we think they have dyslexia or dysgraphia, we were always told to say basically, oh, that's a doctor's diagnosis, we can keep that into consideration, but we kind of have to do our own testing for learning disability. And just like you've said, we just even, that was 10 years ago when I left teaching, but even then it was like even special ed teachers weren't really being trained on what dyslexia was. We were just told, oh, it could be part of a learning disability, but
Right.
no very distinct strategies for public school teachers to use.
Right. I think we have just a host of issues around that. One is that we don't train teachers in the teacher training programs about dyslexia, even though it is the largest reading disability, it captures the most kids. And when you look at kids that are not tracking in class and then they get pulled into additional reading intervention, the bulk majority of those are somewhere on that dyslexia spectrum.
Wow.
And so what happens is that we have our school systems have bought into curriculum, like the whole language model has been really popular for quite a while now, and it doesn't work for dyslexic kids. And it's not a great one from really a scientific basis. There is a lot of research around how the brain learns to read. And so the things that work for dyslexic children work for all kids. If you use that instruction method, it will work for all children. So rather than capturing kind of what works for maybe 80% of kids, we could capture the whole population of the school. And so, if you want to have the highest literacy rates in your school, then that one change will do that. But what we do is we take this curriculum that doesn't really work, and then we have the kids do it in a small group. So it's like, if it's not going to work in the corporate setting, it's not going to work on a 3 kids and one teacher.
Right.
So that's a real struggle. And then the other part is that I think there's been kind of this legal thing going on where they don't want to say the word, because if they say the word, then they have to provide
the funding for it.
And so, one of our big frustrations has always been that we have a title in our schools called reading specialists, but we have never met a reading specialist that had training in dyslexia. So that has been a frustrating thing as a parent as well. So I think it's just, part of that is getting training. And I know, like, Alex's tutor for dyslexia, she goes in and teaches, she does continuing education classes in school about dyslexia and like how to pick up the science and that sort of thing. And so I think we need to work on that part of it. And we also need to not be afraid to say it. And there have been some big national campaigns, say dyslexia, say it, and even when I worked with a group of people here on our first dyslexia bill that passed into law, and just in, I think it was 2016 that we passed.
Wow. And you helped with that?
Yeah, I offered my artistic abilities, and I did some graphic design stuff, and just was part of that group, sort of making that happen. And so now, legally they have to say it. And so that was the one thing that we've seen, is that when you get a letter that says that your child is not tracking for move on when reading, they have to use the word that dyslexia is a possibility. Because I think, if you don't know anything about it, how would you recognize it in your child? So I think just saying the word is a really big deal, because there's a wealth of information online, and you can go through those early signs. Yeah, and there are, some things. I just want to list a few for any parents that are thinking, oh, maybe this is something that we're dealing with. You might hear your kid pronounce words incorrectly, like in the toddler years, and sometimes that gets confused with like baby talk, and that's what we thought it was for Alex. But he would say marote instead of remote. He would say scabetti instead of spaghetti. And even like a neurotypical kid, they often say spaghetti wrong, but they say pischetti. And he would say scabetti. So it's like these weird things where he was hearing, and what that means is it's an auditory processing thing. They're hearing, those things wrong. And he still has things that, I'll catch, like M&Ms, he says N and N's. So he still, there's still those things that sort of, hang up. And then it's like not connecting the letter symbol to the sound is a big marker. And then that that holistic left-right confusion, and is part of it too.
Well, and I like that what did they used to call it? You were saying there was a phrase that people used to use for
Oh,
dyslexia.
yeah, early on it was called word blindness, because
Word blindness. Interesting.
yeah, dyslexia does not impact intellect. And so there's early accounts dating way back into the 20s and 30s that they would say, well, he was the smartest fellow in the class, but he couldn't see any of the words on the page. So they thought it was like a visual issue. And some of those myths have kind of carried over. So, I mean, when we were figuring things out, and people try to be so helpful, but they would say, well, I think you need to get his vision checked,
Oh, yeah.
and that's just like one of those carryover myths, just like some people still think that they see words backwards or they read backwards, or and those are all just myths that are carryovers.
Okay, so seeing words backwards, that's not always the case.
No, and in fact, you'll see that some dyslexic people do flip letters early on, right? And so then that's where things become confusing, like your P, Q, B, D, right? Because when you flip it, it's a different letter. And so, if you think about, if you had a banana and you flipped a banana upside down, it's still a banana. And so I think that's where
Interesting.
so our symbols are confusing, I think, too, to
Yeah.
design. But I mean, we have seen that clear up. But when he was little, he would check. He would go like this to check which was the B or the D,
Yeah.
So, some of those things just have to get into the brain a different way.
Yeah. Well, we were talking too about how like your illustration and your artistic background actually really played a role in helping your son. So maybe could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I just love that connection there.
Yeah. So, well, a couple of things. When we pulled him out of school and did that cognitive therapy, and then I was homeschooling him, there were kind of two things that came to mind for me. And one was that I felt like I needed something for myself, because I could tell that dyslexia was about to take over our lives. And it really has.
Well, like
And
you said, another member of the family. That's
yeah,
really,
it's another member of the family. Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of joke with my husband. I'm like, when he graduates from high school, I don't even know what I'm going to think about anymore, because dyslexia is like top of mind every day.
yeah,
But,
I bet.
yeah, and so I just had this desire to get back into drawing. And so when he was in his different therapies, I just always had my sketchbook, and and it's great because I was kind of, building up those skills again and doing something that I really love, but it also helps you kind of work through a lot of things. And then I started taking classes, like online illustration classes, so that I could have something that was just mine. Yeah. And so in one of the classes that I took, we had to do some kind of illustrated map, a personal illustrated map of any kind. And we had to do these different sketches. And so what came forth from that, the fruit of that, was just something that I didn't know was going to shift things for me in my illustration life. But I did a day in the life of a courageous dyslexic student. And it's a one pager, and it shows, I actually have a copy here I can show you. And it's a little cartoon of my son.
Oh, I love this.
And it shows sort of all of the obstacles and the opportunities in any given day for a dyslexic student. And so I did that illustration, and it is forever free on my website to parents, because what I found is that it's a great tool for an IEP meeting, or the first time you meet a teacher. It captures all these things in this one illustration. And so I did that, and it got kind of shared around, and that's how the opportunity to illustrate Dyslexia Land came to me. The author, Sherry Ray, saw the illustration, and she said she had it on her pin board there. And then she reached out to me, and she's like, would you consider maybe doing some illustrations for this book I'm working on? And so she sent it to me, and it was like, I read the manuscript for the first time, and I remember just sort of like fist pumping, because it was like this book for parents. There's a lot of books out there for about dyslexia, but this is what it's going to be like for you.
Okay.
and so that's why it was such a great opportunity, I think, because it's like she was just tapping into everything that I was going through at that time.
Put it all into words, where you would put it into pictures.
Yeah. And so that's how that opportunity came around. So, and we're talking about collaborating on some other things right now too that are really, really kind of exciting. so that was just a fantastic opportunity. I'm so proud to be a part of that. So that's kind of how the genesis of all of that. And then, my son has a lot of artistic ability, and we have really leveraged that for him in his learning. And so that's something I would recommend to any parents that are seeing that maybe things aren't getting in a certain way, to shift to drawing. Is just, it's great when you're struggling with words to kind of take those off the table. And so like I shared with you, one example is that, when he was studying the age of exploration, he uses the same app that I use to draw all of my work for my business. But so he did these digital, drawings of caricatures of the different explorers, and then he would, do things so that he could remember which was which. So
Brilliant.
yeah, so for Henry Hudson, he drew the caricature, and then he brought in a picture of Times Square, so then he could remember that he discovered the area that's now New York, and the Hudson River's there, and all of that sort of thing. So we try to leverage drawing things as much as we can, and it really is super helpful for him. It just really, it gets into that right brain that is so much stronger for him.
I love that. What app do you like to use, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, Procreate is
Procreate. Okay, I just bought it a couple of months ago.
You're gonna love it. Yeah, you're gonna love it. Yeah, it's a great tool, and even when we're doing math, we'll use it. And there's just some funny things, like kind of just shifting a little bit. One of the things that I learned from the various tutors that I had when he was really struggling with dysgraphia is that sometimes they would go from working on paper to going on a whiteboard, because you're moving from fine motor to gross motor. And I found that with him, that he can write better on a large scale.
Whiteboard. Wow.
So that, just those little tweaks can really make a big difference.
Ooh, I love that. Well, and that is just something I'm so passionate, is play-based learning, that hands-on. And, with COVID, everything's shifting with education. We talked about this, but I think there's just a lot of good that's going to come out of it, just from education and just trying different things to help our kids learn.
Yeah, I agree. It's been interesting to see from my perspective. So I have both of my kids in remote learning mode right now. And one is in a public school and one's in a charter school. And it's been interesting to watch how two different schools are approaching the learning. And this semester it's all live stream, so they just sort of log into their class, and
they're just listening live. Oh, interesting.
And that has been really great too. And then then they can shift to whether their assignment is online or something that they can do, and then like snap a picture of and attach it to.
So you have like the live stream. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's working really well. I think my only complaint would be the same complaint that I would have in the in-person setting, is that it's just a long day, and
sure.
To break things up more, I think, is really good for our brains. But.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this too. One of my other passions is online learning, and like, how do we incorporate play into it, so it's not just like all this screen time, all these cool apps, which have their place. But I was asking you, like, how has online learning been for your son? And you were saying like it's been so good for him. So that's really cool to see, like, different, because I know for a lot of kids, one of my kids, she like hates the online learning. She gets bored, she loses interest, and she wants to like touch things, but that's awesome that like it works for him.
Yeah, it does. And it's nice, like, there's certain things that work that we've had to fight for in the in-person setting that we don't even have to worry about right now.
Oh.
Another thing, I should have brought a page of his drawings, but when he is in active engaged listening mode, so listening to a lecture, he is just covering the page with drawings. And if he doesn't do that, the information does not go in. And so
was that a little bit of a fight to be able to be allowed to doodle and draw while
it has been in other schools. I don't think the current school that he's in, I don't think it'll be an issue, because they do have more kids with just different things going on. They have more IEPs and things like that. It's just sort of a more flexible kind of environment. But definitely in public school, we struggled with that. And it depends on the teacher too.
Sure.
And I think the more old-fashioned thinking is that if you're drawing, you're not listening, which But
Right.
if you looked at my college notes, you would see a lot of drawing. So,
Yes.
it's just, I think that,
It was your way of processing. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that we need to recognize the individual learner.
Right. Right. And not be afraid if kids look different in their learning, the way that they learn and need different things. Yeah. Well,
Right.
and I think that was one of my biggest concerns going into this year for my own kids, is like, I knew there were going to be so many more rules because of safety with the
Mm-hmm.
masks and the cleaning. And I knew that one of my kids, school was already a struggle. So to add the rules, I was like, I've got to figure out a way to like keep that love of hands-on learning for her. And so we kind of do this hybrid part-time homeschool part-time, and we have loved it, just having that time together, where she's making volcanoes and we're making Play-Doh, and it's that, like you were saying, it's that creative side of her brain.
And I think that's so crucial. And, I think I mentioned this before, my older child, who's a sophomore, she's a fairly neurotypical learner.
Mm,
She has a few things that she needs, like, that we've learned over time. She likes to have a lot of time to review. She's not a crammer. There's just, you learn things about your kid, and they learn things about themselves, like what kind of note taking works for them or whatever. But all in all, she's been in public school K through now, and it works for her. That
sure.
model works for her really well, and that's great. And then doing something different with a different child, that's great too. It's just, yeah, I think sometimes we think, oh well, they're going to go to school together and they're going to
Yeah,
have
yeah,
siblings
yeah.
and all of that, and it's like, I don't know, I just think we're all individuals, and different things work for different kids. And one of the things that I like about the school that we have Alex at right now is that they have a Montessori program
Oh, I
track.
love Montessori.
Yeah, you
Love it.
can do that from preschool through sixth grade at that school, and then they have sort of the typical on level track, and then they have a gifted track, and so they're able to automatically capture a lot of different things in one campus, and I just appreciate
Brilliant.
that. And it's not, we didn't do the Montessori track because he moved like right at the end of sixth grade, but had I known about that school, I think that could have been a really neat choice for him.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that would be something I would pass on to other parents, and whether there's a learning challenge or not, sometimes it's just the type of person you are, that
Yes.
like you might thrive in that Montessori
Yeah.
garden,
Garden.
like,
That's a great description, because it is a garden. It's that whole wood, it's the
yeah,
manipulatives, it's the child-based love. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think, just the personality of your kid, and it's okay if it's different for every single kid you have. And, it might make your driving schedule
You're right.
complicated.
Maybe your life crazy, but
Yeah,
yeah. But I think just the COVID has opened our eyes to being able to see like maybe how our kids are learning, just
mhm.
because we've had to emergency school them
Yeah,
and be
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
suddenly I know what you're struggling with. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are so many great resources too, that you're not limited to the school at the end of your street, right?
Yeah.
There are online options, there are charters, homeschool is great. My sister is a homeschooler.
Hmm.
She's homeschooled her son since he was in first grade, and he's in seventh grade this year, and that's working for them. And I
Yeah.
just love that. I mean, like, you have to do what you think's best, because
Right.
you're the best.
Right. You know your kid the best. Exactly. I love that. Well, and maybe just tell us a little bit about your illustration background. Like, how did you come to start your own business?
Yeah. So I have actually I have a degree in design, and
Okay.
so I spent a good decade or more in commercial interiors and graphic design. And when we had kids, it was like we both had these really big careers.
Mhm.
That's how I would describe it. We had lots of meetings, and we had lots of places to be, and a lot of deadlines, and it was just really rough. So, we would have, the daycare would call and someone would have a fever, and
Mm.
I would call my husband and I would say, what meetings do you have this afternoon? Because I can go get her now, but then I have to be back, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was this stress that we didn't want, and it wasn't sort of how we envisioned our family to be. And so what we decided was we set a goal to hit these certain financial markers by the time my daughter started kindergarten. And so that summer before she started kindergarten, I left the corporate world. And I was doing freelance work at that time. I did some interiors, but I never really had a love for interiors. I didn't love that job. And I enjoyed graphic design much more. And truth be told, I went into design because I think my parents and people around me, my formative years were just like, you'll starve as an
You're gonna be
artist.
poor as an artist. Yeah.
So I went to like art adjacent and got a degree in design. And so then I did, a lot of years of graphic design work, and like, I felt like illustration was just always calling,
Yes.
And so then once Alex was, I really saw how much he was struggling and how difficult school was. I thought, I need to model for him that he can be an artist.
Love.
And so that's why I started my business. I said, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make a living off of this because this is what I love to do. So
I love that. Well, and for him to see you follow what was calling you could help him with his art too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's my way of encouraging and showing, and truthfully for my daughter too, like when, some of the discussions that we have with kids about careers are just kind of more sort of pragmatic. Well, this, if you do this for a living, then, you'll make a good income, or, that sort of thing. And so, for her, like I, knowing her, she is just such a nurturer, and I know that she's going to be a wonderful mom. And so when we talked about things, career-wise, as she's approaching college, the thing that I like to say is think about things that will help you be the kind of mom you want to be. So what career is flexible for you? Like, what kinds of things do you like to do that might be a flexible career? Because I think that career and parenting can go alongside of each other. I don't think
love.
It doesn't have to be
one or
one
the
doesn't
other.
have to be thrown out the window to do it well, And so, one of the things that I mentioned to you when we talked before was that I try to think of living in seasons. That's how I kind of keep my sanity. So I have a lot of educational responsibility at home, and that comes with kids in general, but when you have a learning disability thrown into the mix, there's extra stuff. There's tutoring to get to, there's sort of managing all these moving parts. There's IEP meetings, which can be very painful. There's and a lot of prep, goes into that. Yeah. And so I have to manage all of those things, and that is my first priority in this season. So I have to
won't last forever.
The season won't last forever. And so I try to make goals for my business that are, because I've learned the hard way. Sometimes I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I'm drowning, and I don't want to be like that either. So, if I don't get to Instagram in a week, then I don't get to it. Should I post every day? I don't know, maybe I should, but it's not going to happen right now. Yeah, it's not going to happen right now. So I just try to do things in that respect. And, because we are in remote learning right now, that's a lot of my day, managing. And so, right now on the weekends, I'm doing a lot of drawing. I'm in a time intensive career. It takes time to do the drawings, right? Yeah. It's not something you can kind of, and inspiration comes when it comes too. That's the other thing.
Sometimes at the worst possible times.
Sometimes at the worst time. Yeah. And so I make up for what I lose in the week. On the weekend, I try to, do some of my things then. And that's the season. And I have goals for my business that I'm going to get to once we get through some of this other stuff. And that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I love what you said about parenthood and career can go together. And I think as women, we need to hear that, because so often we hear in our culture, you have to choose. Mm-hmm. And it has to be one or the other. But I am a strong advocate that as women, we can have both. It might be hard. It might be a different season that we have one,
Yeah.
then the other. It might be complicated, but if that's what we want, we can get there. Right? I
Yeah,
feel hopeful
absolutely.
in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's why we see so many women owned businesses now.
Yes.
Because I mean, I have certainly had those corporate jobs that were not family friendly. I have
Sure.
had those jobs,
Sure.
and I would tell women to run, and just try to figure something else out. And and I had to work in those jobs for a while because that was the job that was available. And when I graduated from college, we were just in like this terrible recession, and I was just happy to have a job.
Right. Right. And you need it.
So things happen like that too, and I get that. Like, but you can work towards these other things that have more flexibility. But one of the things that I heard a long time ago that I try to keep in mind too is that I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves about balance, and I
Mhm.
think that
Amen.
you're not going to see balance in a day or a week, but maybe over a course of a year, you could say, man, I had that season with that deadline and I worked my tail off and it was just all work. But then we took that great trip together as a family. So those two sort of balance each other out.
Oh,
So
I
rather
love
than trying
that.
to, instead of trying to say like, well, my
Let's
week
be
is going,
balanced today. Yeah.
yeah, but to look over the course of the year and to try to carve in that time for the things that are important. Yeah,
Love
and
that.
work is important too. Carving in time to work for me, like on the weekends, that's important to me.
Oh yeah. And it's good for you. It's
Yeah,
good for, and then you can be a better mom and a wife and a friend when you've done what you love too.
yeah, yeah. That's so
Oh, I
true.
love that. Liz, so many great wisdom nuggets. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
Thanks
welcome.
for sharing on the podcast. I will for sure in the comments put some of the links you sent me so that people can contact you and see your book that you helped illustrate and see maybe some resources if their own child is struggling with
Yeah,
dyslexia or
yeah,
wondering.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think just real quick, like if I were to just say one resource to look at, because this goes beyond dyslexia, but if you notice anything with your kids struggling in school, go to understood.org.
Mm.
And it is just a plethora of information about all different kinds of things that could be going on, and there's just a wealth of information. They have great things like, you know, here's some accommodations you should ask for this, and it's just
Ooh,
it's a
I love
fantastic
that. I'm
site.
going to write that down for sure. Understood.org.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll include that in there too.
great.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.